The silence in the research station was unnatural. Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her back against the cold metal wall, listening to the steady drip of something she hoped was water from the broken ceiling pipes. 3 days ago, Station Kepler 442 had been home to 237 researchers, engineers, and security personnel. Now she was alone, hiding in a maintenance shaft while death stalked the corridors. The thing hunting her wasn't from any world humans had catalogued. It had arrived without warning aboard what appeared to be a derelict ship that had drifted into their system. The salvage team brought it aboard for study, thinking they'd found ancient alien technology. They were right about it being alien. They were wrong about it being dead. Sarah heard the soft whisper of movement in the corridor below. Through the grate, she could see a shadow pass beneath her hiding spot. The creature moved with fluid grace, its form shifting between states of matter like liquid mercury given murderous intent. She'd watched it hunt the others, learning their patterns, adapting to their weapons, becoming more efficient with each kill. The official designation in the emergency logs was unknown hostile entity, but the survivors had called it the apex hunter before their transmissions went silent. It seemed appropriate. This thing was evolution's perfect predator, designed by some cosmic intelligence to be the ultimate killer. Every defense they mounted it overcame. Every weapon they fired it adapted to resist. Every hiding place they found it eventually discovered. Sarah controlled her breathing, remembering her grandfather's lessons from his time as a guerrilla fighter on Earth. He'd taught her that survival wasn't about being the strongest or fastest. It was about being patient, being smart, and knowing when to act. The creature below her had enhanced hearing, but it seemed to filter out consistent background noise. The dripping water masked her heartbeat. Her tablet showed 17 hours until the relief ship arrived. Admiral Morrison's fleet was racing toward Kepler 442 after receiving their distress beacon, but Sarah wasn't sure she could last that long. Food wasn't the issue. Water wasn't the problem. The apex hunter was learning. Each day it grew more sophisticated in its hunting patterns. The creature paused directly below her position. Sarah could see its form clearly now through the grate. It stood roughly 8 feet tall, but its shape was constantly shifting. Sometimes it appeared almost humanoid. Other times it flowed like liquid shadow. Bioluminescent veins pulsed beneath its surface, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. The scientists had theorized it might be some kind of programmable matter, engineered by an extinct civilization as a weapon. One clawed appendage extended upward, testing the air near her hiding spot. Sarah held perfectly still, watching as the claw scraped against the metal just inches from her face. The creature's head tilted and she could see what might have been sensory organs rotating like mechanical flowers. It was beautiful in the way that apex predators often were, perfectly suited to its function. The emergency lighting flickered, casting dancing shadows across the corridor. The apex hunter straightened, apparently deciding she wasn't there, and continued its patrol. Sarah waited until the sound of its movement faded before allowing herself to breathe normally again. She activated her tablet's silent mode and reviewed the security footage she'd managed to salvage. The creature's arrival had been recorded by the dock cameras. The derelict ship hadn't been empty at all. It had been a transport, carrying this single entity in some kind of stasis pod. The pod had opened automatically when brought aboard, releasing its occupant into an environment full of potential prey. The early footage showed the creature's first encounters with station personnel. It had moved awkwardly at first, like someone learning to walk in an unfamiliar body, but it learned fast. Within hours, it was moving with predatory efficiency. Within a day, it had mapped the entire station and begun systematic hunting. Sarah studied the attack patterns, looking for weaknesses. The creature seemed to prioritize targets based on some internal logic she couldn't understand. It had killed the security chief first, then the senior engineers, then the research team leaders. But it had ignored the maintenance staff initially, only hunting them after the more valuable targets were eliminated. There was something else in the footage that bothered her. The creature's behavior changed subtly when it encountered certain individuals. It had hesitated before killing Dr. Martinez, the xenobiologist. It had circled Professor Kim 3 times before striking. And when it found Chief Engineer Brooks hiding in the reactor room, it had stood over him for nearly 10 minutes before delivering the killing blow. Sarah switched to the medical bay footage, watching the creature's encounter with the station's AI, Aria. The artificial intelligence had tried to communicate with it, displaying mathematical sequences and universal constants on every screen in the facility. The creature had studied these displays intently, its bioluminescent patterns shifting to match some of the sequences. For a moment it had seemed almost responsive. Then it had destroyed the central computer core with surgical precision. The relief fleet couldn't arrive soon enough, but Sarah was beginning to doubt that conventional weapons would be effective against this thing. It had shrugged off plasma rifles, laughed at explosive charges, and seemed to regenerate from any damage they managed to inflict. Worse, it was getting smarter. The creature that had stumbled out of its pod 3 days ago was gone, replaced by something that understood human technology and behavior. Sarah checked her grandfather's old survival manual on her tablet. He'd written it after the Beijing uprising, detailing unconventional tactics for fighting superior forces. One passage caught her attention. When facing an enemy that adapts to your methods, you must become unpredictable. Do what they don't expect, be what they can't categorize. The apex hunter expected her to run, to hide, to fight desperately for survival. It had learned human behavior from observing its previous victims. But what if she did something completely different? What if instead of being prey, she became something else entirely? Sarah closed the manual and began planning. The creature was methodical, logical, and adaptive. But there might be one thing it hadn't encountered yet in its systematic study of human behavior. She was going to test a theory that could either save her life or end it very quickly. The sound of movement echoed through the ventilation system. The apex hunter was beginning another search pattern. Sarah gathered her equipment and prepared to leave her hiding place. It was time to stop being prey and start being something the creature had never seen before. The hunt was about to change direction. Sarah emerged from the maintenance shaft with deliberate noise, her boots clanging against the metal ladder. The sound echoed through the empty corridors like a dinner bell. She wanted the apex hunter to hear her. Everything depended on getting its attention in exactly the right way. The station's emergency lighting cast long shadows as she walked openly through the central hub. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes the best place to hide is in plain sight. But this wasn't hiding. This was something far more dangerous. She'd spent the last 6 hours studying everything the station's computers had recorded about the creature. The apex hunter wasn't just a mindless killing machine. It showed clear signs of intelligence, pattern recognition, and adaptive learning. More importantly, it showed curiosity. When it encountered something new or unexpected, it paused to study it before acting. Sarah reached the central atrium and stopped. The massive space rose 5 levels above her, with walkways and observation decks providing multiple vantage points. Perfect hunting ground for a predator. Perfect stage for what she was about to attempt. She activated her tablet and began playing music. Not the harsh industrial sounds that had filled the station during the emergency, but something completely different. Bach's Goldberg variations filled the air, the complex mathematical beauty of the composition echoing off the metal walls. She'd chosen it deliberately. Music was pure pattern, pure mathematics expressed in sound. If the creature was as intelligent as she suspected, it would recognize the underlying structure. The response was immediate. A shadow moved on the 3rd-level walkway. The apex hunter had found her, but it wasn't attacking. It was watching, its form rippling with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to pulse in time with the music. Sarah sat down cross-legged in the center of the atrium, her back straight, her breathing controlled. She closed her eyes and began to meditate, just as her grandfather had taught her during the long months when the Beijing resistance had to remain hidden. The meditation wasn't just for calm. It was a way of changing her brain patterns, her electromagnetic signature, even her scent. The music continued playing while Sarah regulated her heartbeat to match the rhythm. 60 beats per minute. The tempo her grandfather had called the frequency of peace. It was a technique he'd learned from Tibetan monks, used to achieve a state of mental clarity that confused enemy sensors. Above her, the apex hunter began to descend. She could hear its movements, fluid and cautious. It was no longer moving like a predator stalking prey. The sounds were different, more exploratory. When she opened her eyes, the creature was standing 20 feet away, studying her with what might have been confusion. Up close, its alien beauty was even more striking. The bioluminescent patterns weren't random. They formed complex geometric shapes that shifted and evolved as she watched. Mathematical sequences, fractals, patterns that spoke of intelligence beyond human understanding. This wasn't just a weapon. It was a work of art. Sarah slowly reached for her tablet and began inputting a sequence of numbers. The Fibonacci sequence, displayed as pure mathematics on the screen. The creature's patterns immediately began to respond, its bioluminescence shifting to match the sequence. When she changed to prime numbers, it adapted again. Pi, the golden ratio, basic geometric progressions. Each one triggered a corresponding change in the creature's display. They were communicating. Sarah stood slowly, keeping her movements deliberate and non-threatening. The creature remained motionless, its sensory organs tracking her every motion. She walked to one of the atrium's large displays and began drawing diagrams with her finger. Simple geometric shapes at first, then more complex patterns. The apex hunter approached the display, extending one of its appendages to touch the screen. Where it made contact, new patterns appeared, far more sophisticated than anything Sarah could have imagined. Three-dimensional mathematical constructs that seemed to exist partially outside normal space. She was looking at alien mathematics, concepts that human science hadn't even discovered yet. Sarah pulled up the station's star charts and pointed to Earth, then to herself. The creature studied the display intently, its patterns shifting through what might have been analysis mode. Then it extended its appendage to the screen again, drawing a route through space that led to a region beyond the galaxy's edge. Its home, perhaps, or its origin point. The communication was interrupted by the sound of approaching ships. Admiral Morrison's fleet had arrived ahead of schedule. Through the atrium's windows, Sarah could see the sleek forms of human warships taking positions around the station. Their weapon systems were already powering up, preparing for battle against an alien threat. The apex hunter's demeanor changed instantly. Its bioluminescent patterns shifted to what Sarah could only describe as alarm colors. It moved away from the display, its form becoming more predatory, more focused. The peaceful mathematical communion was over. It was preparing for combat. Sarah realized with growing horror that the relief fleet was about to attack a being that might be trying to communicate. The creature wasn't necessarily hostile. It had killed the station crew, yes, but perhaps only because it had been programmed to do so, or because it hadn't understood what humans were. Now that it had encountered someone who could communicate in the universal language of mathematics, everything had changed. She activated her communicator, trying to reach Admiral Morrison. Static filled the channel. The fleet was jamming all transmissions to prevent the alien from intercepting their communications. They had no idea that the situation had evolved beyond simple predator and prey. The apex hunter turned to her, its sensory organs focusing on the communicator in her hand. For a moment, she thought it might attack. Instead, it extended its appendage toward the device. When she hesitated, it made a sound that might have been frustration or urgency. Sarah handed over the communicator. The creature studied it briefly. Then its appendage flowed into the device like liquid metal. Suddenly, the static cleared and Admiral Morrison's voice filled the atrium. "Unknown entity, this is Admiral Morrison of the Terran Defense Fleet. You are ordered to surrender immediately or face destruction. You have 30 seconds to comply." The apex hunter's pattern shifted to what Sarah recognized as the mathematical sequence for communication. It was trying to talk to them. She grabbed the communicator back and activated the emergency override. "Admiral Morrison, this is Dr. Sarah Chen on Kepler 442. Do not fire. The entity is attempting to communicate. I repeat, do not fire. Dr. Chen, we thought there were no survivors. Are you in immediate danger?" Sarah looked at the apex hunter, which was watching the exchange with obvious intelligence. "No, Admiral. I don't think I am, but I need time to establish proper communication protocols. This being may not be hostile." "Negative, Doctor. Our scans show it's a biological weapon of unknown origin. We can't take the risk." The apex hunter seemed to understand the conversation's implications. Its patterns shifted to display what Sarah recognized as a defensive configuration. Energy began to gather around its form, preparing for the coming battle. "Admiral, wait," Sarah said urgently. "It's not just a weapon. It's intelligent. It's been trying to communicate through mathematics. If we attack now, we might be destroying the first truly alien intelligence humanity has ever encountered." There was a long pause. Finally, Morrison's voice returned, though Sarah could hear the reluctance in it. "You have 10 minutes, Doctor. But if that thing makes any hostile move, we're firing." 10 minutes to bridge the gap between species that had evolved on opposite sides of the galaxy. 10 minutes to prevent a war that neither side truly wanted. Sarah looked at the apex hunter and began to formulate a plan that would either save both their species or doom them all. Sarah's hands moved frantically across the display screen, drawing mathematical concepts as fast as she could think of them. The apex hunter watched intently, its bioluminescent patterns responding to each new equation. Time was running out, and she could feel the weight of two civilizations resting on her ability to establish meaningful communication. She started with basic concepts: addition, subtraction, multiplication. The creature responded immediately, its patterns showing not just understanding but impatience. It was far beyond such simple mathematics. Sarah moved to more complex ideas: calculus, quantum mechanics, relativistic physics. Each time, the apex hunter's responses showed a grasp of concepts that exceeded human knowledge. 8 minutes. Doctor? Admiral Morrison's voice crackled through the communicator. Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead and tried a different approach. Instead of abstract mathematics, she began drawing representations of physical objects. A hydrogen atom, then helium, then more complex elements. The creature's response was immediate and startling. Its appendage touched the screen, and suddenly the display filled with a complete periodic table that included elements humanity hadn't discovered yet. The apex hunter was teaching her. Sarah realized that the communication was flowing both ways. This being wasn't just responding to her inputs. It was actively trying to share knowledge. She drew a simple representation of DNA, the double helix structure that carried genetic information for Earth life. The creature studied it, then drew its own version, a triple helix structure of incredible complexity, with additional components that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. Dr. Chen, Morrison's voice was getting more tense. Our sensors are detecting energy buildup around the entity. Whatever you're doing, it's getting agitated. Sarah looked at the apex hunter more carefully. The Admiral was right. Energy was gathering around the creature's form, but Sarah was beginning to understand that this wasn't necessarily a hostile response. The being seemed frustrated, almost desperate to communicate something important. She changed tactics again, this time drawing a simple representation of the station they were on, then showing the arrival of the derelict ship. The creature's pattern shifted to what she was learning to recognize as excitement. It began drawing its own version of events, and the story that emerged was heartbreaking. The apex hunter drew image after image, creating a narrative that Sarah struggled to understand. The being showed its home world, a place of incredible beauty where creatures like itself had lived in harmony. Then came the invasion, dark ships filled with beings that seemed to be made of pure malevolence. A war that lasted for eons, with the apex hunter's people fighting desperately to survive. The final images were the most tragic. The apex hunter showed itself being placed in the stasis pod, not as a weapon but as a refugee, the last survivor of its species, launched into space in the hope that it might find somewhere safe to exist. The derelict ship hadn't been carrying a weapon at all. It had been carrying a desperate soul seeking sanctuary. 6 minutes, Doctor. Sarah's heart was racing as she began to understand the full scope of the tragedy. The apex hunter had awakened in the research station, surrounded by alien beings, with no way to communicate its peaceful intentions. Its natural hunting abilities had taken over, designed not for conquest but for survival in a hostile universe. Every person it had killed had been a misunderstanding, a failure of communication between species that had no common reference points. She drew rapidly on the screen, showing herself and the other humans, then adding symbols to indicate peaceful intentions. The apex hunter's response was immediate and devastating. Its pattern shifted to what could only be described as grief. It understood now what it had done. The being began drawing symbols that Sarah interpreted as apologies, repeated over and over again. Sarah activated the communicator. Admiral Morrison, I'm uploading everything to your ship's computers right now. This being isn't a weapon. It's a refugee, the last survivor of a dead civilization, and it's been trying to apologize for what it did to the station crew. Doctor, that's impossible. Our analysis shows it's clearly designed for combat. Yes, but not for conquest. For survival. Its people were wiped out by something else, something that sounds far worse than anything we've encountered. Admiral, this being has knowledge that could advance human science by centuries, and more than that, it's asking for our help. Through the windows, Sarah could see the fleet's weapons system still charging. The apex hunter noticed them too, and its energy display intensified. But now Sarah understood that this wasn't aggression. It was fear. The being was preparing to defend itself against what it perceived as another hostile alien species. 4 minutes, Doctor. I need concrete proof that this thing isn't a threat. Sarah looked at the apex hunter, then made a decision that would either save them both or doom them all. She walked directly up to the creature and placed her hand against its shifting surface. The contact was electric, literally. Energy flowed between them, and suddenly Sarah's mind was flooded with images, emotions, and concepts that no human brain was designed to process. She saw the apex hunter's homeworld in its full glory. Floating cities of living crystal, beings of pure energy dancing between dimensions, a civilization that had mastered the fundamental forces of the universe. She felt its joy, its curiosity, its deep love for learning and exploration. She experienced its terror as the dark invaders came, entities of pure malevolence that consumed entire star systems. Most importantly, she felt its desperate hope when it had first awakened in the research station, hope that had turned to confusion, then to horror as its survival instincts took over and it began killing the very beings it had hoped to befriend. The connection lasted only seconds, but it changed everything. When Sarah opened her eyes, she found tears streaming down her face. The apex hunter's patterns had shifted to a soft, gentle glow that somehow conveyed sympathy and understanding. "Admiral," Sarah said into the communicator, her voice shaking with emotion, "I've made contact. Direct contact. This being is not our enemy. It wants to be our friend. It has knowledge that could help us defend against the real threat that's coming." "What real threat, Doctor?" Sarah looked at the apex hunter, which was already drawing new images on the display, star charts showing the path of the dark invaders. Their inexorable movement toward this part of the galaxy, toward Earth. "Admiral, we need to talk, and we need to bring our new friend with us. Because if what it's showing me is accurate, humanity is about to face an enemy that makes the apex hunter look like a house pet, and our only hope of survival just walked into our lives disguised as a monster." The energy buildup around the apex hunter began to fade. Its patterns shifted to something that Sarah was learning to recognize as hope. The being extended one of its appendages toward her, not in threat but in a gesture that transcended species boundaries. It was offering friendship to a universe that had shown it nothing but hostility. Sarah reached out and took the appendage in her hand. The moment their skin touched, she felt a connection that would change the course of human history. The apex hunter had found something it had been searching for across the galaxy. It had found its master, not through conquest or submission, but through the simple act of recognition. Two species meeting in friendship despite the blood and misunderstanding that lay between them. The hunt was over. The real war was about to begin. The war room aboard Admiral Morrison's flagship buzzed with tension as Sarah finished her briefing. The holographic display showed the apex hunter's star charts, depicting the movement of the dark entities across the galaxy. Red markers indicated dead systems, their stars extinguished, their planets reduced to lifeless husks. The pattern was clear and terrifying. The destroyers were moving steadily toward human space. Sarah stood beside the apex hunter, which had taken on a more stable humanoid form for the meeting. Its bioluminescent patterns pulsed gently, responding to the emotional undercurrents in the room. The being's ability to read and react to human emotions was uncanny, almost as if it was designed to form bonds with other species. "You're asking me to believe that this creature, which killed over 200 researchers, is now humanity's best hope for survival?" Admiral Morrison's weathered face showed deep skepticism. "Doctor, I've seen the security footage. I've read the reports. This thing is a living weapon." "Yes," Sarah replied calmly, "but not our weapon and not aimed at us. Admiral, everything the apex hunter did at the research station was a misunderstanding. It awakened in a strange place surrounded by aliens with no way to communicate. Its survival instincts took over. The apex hunter stepped forward, its form shifting to project a three-dimensional hologram. The image showed two distinct types of beings, the graceful energy-based creatures like itself and something else entirely. The second type appeared as writhing shadows with burning eyes, entities that seemed to exist partially outside normal spacetime. The Devourers, Sarah translated, having learned the concept during her mental connection with the being, that's what its people called them. They're not from our reality. They're parasites from a dimension where entropy runs backward, where existence itself is antithetical to life as we understand it. Fleet Captain Rodriguez leaned forward in her chair. How do we know this isn't an elaborate deception? Maybe this creature is a scout for these so-called devourers. The apex hunter's patterns shifted to what Sarah recognized as sadness. It began projecting new images. The final battle of its home world, where billions of its people had sacrificed themselves to create a barrier that held the devourers at bay. The being showed how it had been chosen as a messenger, placed in stasis with all the accumulated knowledge of its civilization, launched toward distant stars in the hope of finding allies. It's not a scout, Sarah said quietly. It's the sole survivor of a species that died to buy the rest of the galaxy time. Time to prepare. Time to unite. Time to find a way to stop something that has already consumed half of the known universe. Admiral Morrison studied the star charts with growing unease. Assuming this is all true, what makes you think humanity can succeed where an advanced civilization failed? Sarah looked at the apex hunter, which began displaying new information. Images of human technology, human warfare, human ingenuity. The being had been studying their species since arriving at the research station, and what it had learned had given it something its own people had lacked: hope. Humans are different, Sarah explained. Interpreting the apex hunter's projections, most species develop along predictable lines. They become either purely logical, like the Vardani, or purely emotional, like the Zephyrians. Humans are chaotic. We're unpredictable. We combine logic and emotion, aggression and compassion, in ways that no other species has ever managed. The hologram shifted to show human military tactics, focusing on guerrilla warfare, asymmetric strategies, and adaptive thinking. The apex hunter had studied everything from ancient Earth battles to the recent colonial conflicts. It highlighted patterns that even human military analysts hadn't recognized. The devourers adapt to their enemies, Sarah continued. They study their targets, learn their weaknesses, develop countermeasures. But they've never encountered a species that changes its own nature as rapidly as humans do. We're evolutionary chaos, and chaos is the one thing they can't predict or control. Fleet Captain Martinez spoke up from her position at the tactical display. Even if that's true, Doctor, the numbers don't add up. According to these charts, the devourers have consumed thousands of star systems. They have resources we can't even comprehend. The apex hunter's response was immediate. It began projecting technical schematics, showing technology that was centuries ahead of human understanding. Weapons that could manipulate fundamental forces, shields that existed in folded space, engines that could move ships faster than the speed of thought. The being was offering to share the accumulated knowledge of its entire civilization. That's the gift, Sarah said, her voice filled with awe. Not just a warning about the coming threat, but the tools to fight it. The apex hunter's people spent their final years developing anti-devourer technology. They created weapons specifically designed to hurt entities that exist partially outside our reality. Admiral Morrison leaned back in his chair, the weight of decision visible on his face. And in return, what does it want from us? Sarah looked at the apex hunter, feeling the emotional resonance of their connection. It wants what any refugee wants: a home, a purpose, a chance to honor the memory of its people. It's offering to fight alongside us, to teach us everything it knows, to help us prepare for what's coming. And you trust it completely? Morrison asked. I trust it more than I trust ourselves, Sarah replied honestly. Admiral, this being could have destroyed our entire fleet if it wanted to. Instead, it's sharing its most precious possessions: knowledge and hope. The question isn't whether we can trust it. The question is whether we're worthy of the trust it's placing in us. The apex hunter stepped forward again, its form shifting to display one final image. It showed Earth, beautiful and blue and alive, surrounded by a protective barrier made of human ships and alien technology working in harmony. In the background, the darkness of the devourers pressed against the light, held at bay by the combined will of two species that had chosen to stand together. Admiral Morrison stood slowly, his decision made. Dr. Chen, you're being reassigned to the Xenological Contact Division effective immediately. Your job is to work with our new ally to prepare humanity for war. Captain Rodriguez, begin implementing Protocol 7. I want every ship in the fleet upgraded with whatever technology our friend can provide. Sarah felt a surge of relief and terror in equal measure. The apex hunter's patterns shifted to what she was learning to recognize as gratitude, but also determination. The being extended its appendage toward Admiral Morrison in a gesture that transcended species boundaries. Morrison hesitated for only a moment before reaching out to clasp the alien appendage. The contact was brief, but Sarah could see the change in the Admiral's expression. He had felt what she had felt, the depth of loss, the weight of responsibility, and the burning hope that had carried the Apex Hunter across the galaxy. "Welcome to the Terran Defense Fleet," Morrison said formally. "What should we call you?" The Apex Hunter's response came through the translation matrix Sarah had helped establish. The sounds were complex harmonics that human throats couldn't reproduce, but the meaning was clear. "I am Kethvar Thulnath," it said, its first words in human language. "But you may call me Guardian. I have sworn an oath to protect this world and its people. As my people once protected others, I will not fail again." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she realized the magnitude of what had just occurred. Humanity had just gained its first alien ally, a being of incredible power and wisdom who had chosen to bind its fate to theirs. But more than that, they had gained something that no amount of technology could provide. They had gained hope. The real war was still coming. The Devourers were still advancing across the galaxy, consuming everything in their path. But for the first time since learning of the threat, Sarah believed they might actually have a chance to win. The Apex Hunter had found its master, not through conquest or domination, but through the simple recognition that sometimes the universe's greatest monsters were actually its greatest protectors, waiting for someone brave enough to see past the surface to the truth beneath. Sarah's hands moved frantically across the display screen, drawing mathematical concepts as fast as she could think of them. The Apex Hunter watched intently, its bioluminescent patterns responding to each new equation. Time was running out, and she could feel the weight of two civilizations resting on her ability to establish meaningful communication. She started with basic concepts. Addition, subtraction, multiplication. The creature responded immediately, its pattern showing not just understanding but impatience. It was far beyond such simple mathematics. Sarah moved to more complex ideas: calculus, quantum mechanics, relativistic physics. Each time, the Apex Hunter's responses showed a grasp of concepts that exceeded human knowledge. 8 minutes. "Doctor." Admiral Morrison's voice crackled through the communicator. Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead and tried a different approach. Instead of abstract mathematics, she began drawing representations of physical objects. A hydrogen atom, then helium, then more complex elements. The creature's response was immediate and startling. Its appendage touched the screen, and suddenly the display filled with a complete periodic table that included elements humanity hadn't discovered yet. The Apex Hunter was teaching her. Sarah realized that the communication was flowing both ways. This being wasn't just responding to her inputs. It was actively trying to share knowledge. She drew a simple representation of DNA, the double helix structure that carried genetic information for Earth life. The creature studied it, then drew its own version. A triple helix structure of incredible complexity, with additional components that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. "Dr. Chen," Morrison's voice was getting more tense. "Our sensors are detecting energy buildup around the entity. Whatever you're doing, it's getting agitated." Sarah looked at the Apex Hunter more carefully. The Admiral was right. Energy was gathering around the creature's form, but Sarah was beginning to understand that this wasn't necessarily a hostile response. The being seemed frustrated, almost desperate to communicate something important. She changed tactics again, this time drawing a simple representation of the station they were on, then showing the arrival of the derelict ship. The creature's patterns shifted to what she was learning to recognize as excitement. It began drawing its own version of events, and the story that emerged was heartbreaking. The Apex Hunter drew image after image, creating a narrative that Sarah struggled to understand. The being showed its homeworld, a place of incredible beauty where creatures like itself had lived in harmony. Then came the invasion. Dark ships filled with beings that seemed to be made of pure malevolence. A war that lasted for eons, with the Apex Hunter's people fighting desperately to survive. The final images were the most tragic. The Apex Hunter showed itself being placed in the stasis pod, not as a weapon but as a refugee, the last survivor of its species, launched into space in the hope that it might find somewhere safe to exist. The derelict ship hadn't been carrying a weapon at all. It had been carrying a desperate soul seeking sanctuary. 6 minutes, Doctor. Sarah's heart was racing as she began to understand the full scope of the tragedy. The apex hunter had awakened in the research station, surrounded by alien beings with no way to communicate its peaceful intentions. Its natural hunting abilities had taken over, designed not for conquest but for survival in a hostile universe. Every person it had killed had been a misunderstanding, a failure of communication between species that had no common reference points. She drew rapidly on the screen, showing herself and the other humans, then adding symbols to indicate peaceful intentions. The apex hunter's response was immediate and devastating. Its pattern shifted to what could only be described as grief. It understood now what it had done. The being began drawing symbols that Sarah interpreted as apologies, repeated over and over again. Sarah activated the communicator. "Admiral Morrison, I'm uploading everything to your ship's computers right now. This being isn't a weapon. It's a refugee, the last survivor of a dead civilization, and it's been trying to apologize for what it did to the station crew. Doctor, that's impossible. Our analysis shows it's clearly designed for combat. Yes, but not for conquest. For survival. Its people were wiped out by something else. Something that sounds far worse than anything we've encountered. Admiral, this being has knowledge that could advance human science by centuries. And more than that, it's asking for our help." Through the windows, Sarah could see the fleet's weapon systems still charging. The apex hunter noticed them too, and its energy display intensified. But now Sarah understood that this wasn't aggression. It was fear. The being was preparing to defend itself against what it perceived as another hostile alien species. 4 minutes, Doctor. I need concrete proof that this thing isn't a threat." Sarah looked at the apex hunter, then made a decision that would either save them both or doom them all. She walked directly up to the creature and placed her hand against its shifting surface. The contact was electric, literally. Energy flowed between them. And suddenly Sarah's mind was flooded with images, emotions, and concepts that no human brain was designed to process. She saw the apex hunter's homeworld in its full glory. Floating cities of living crystal, beings of pure energy dancing between dimensions, a civilization that had mastered the fundamental forces of the universe. She felt its joy, its curiosity, its deep love for learning and exploration. She experienced its terror as the dark invaders came, entities of pure malevolence that consumed entire star systems. Most importantly, she felt its desperate hope when it had first awakened in the research station, hope that had turned to confusion, then to horror as its survival instincts took over and it began killing the very beings it had hoped to befriend. The connection lasted only seconds, but it changed everything. When Sarah opened her eyes, she found tears streaming down her face. The apex hunter's patterns had shifted to a soft, gentle glow that somehow conveyed sympathy and understanding. "Admiral," Sarah said into the communicator, her voice shaking with emotion, "I've made contact. Direct contact. This being is not our enemy. It wants to be our friend. It has knowledge that could help us defend against the real threat that's coming." "What real threat, Doctor?" Sarah looked at the apex hunter, which was already drawing new images on the display. Star charts showing the path of the dark invaders, their inexorable movement toward this part of the galaxy. Toward Earth. "Admiral, we need to talk, and we need to bring our new friend with us. Because if what it's showing me is accurate, humanity is about to face an enemy that makes the apex hunter look like a house pet, and our only hope of survival just walked into our lives disguised as a monster." The energy buildup around the apex hunter began to fade. Its pattern shifted to something that Sarah was learning to recognize as hope. The being extended one of its appendages toward her, not in threat, but in a gesture that transcended species boundaries. It was offering friendship to a universe that had shown it nothing but hostility. Sarah reached out and took the appendage in her hand. The moment their skin touched, she felt a connection that would change the course of human history. The apex hunter had found something it had been searching for across the galaxy. It had found its master, not through conquest or submission, but through the simple act of recognition. Two species meeting in friendship despite the blood and misunderstanding that lay between them. The hunt was over. The real war was about to begin. The first Devourer scout ships arrived on a Tuesday. Sarah was in the middle of calibrating a new reality anchor when alarms began blaring throughout Titan Station. Through the laboratory windows, she could see the impossible sight. 3 vessels that seemed to absorb light itself. their hulls writhing with geometric patterns that made her eyes water when she looked directly at them. Guardian's reaction was immediate and visceral. Its form collapsed into a defensive posture, bioluminescent patterns flashing in rapid sequences that Sarah recognized as pure terror. Through their mental link, she felt echoes of its memories, similar ships appearing in the skies of its home world, the beginning of the end for its entire civilization. "Guardian," Sarah said urgently, placing her hand on its shifting surface. "You're safe. We're prepared for this." The being's form gradually stabilized, though its patterns remained agitated. "Prepared," it repeated through the translator. "Yes, we prepared too. We had weapons, shields, strategies. It was not enough." Admiral Morrison's voice crackled through the station's communication system. "All personnel to battle stations. This is not a drill. Enemy contacts have entered the system and are approaching the defensive perimeter." Sarah activated her tablet, linking directly into the fleet's tactical network. The display showed the human response. 200 ships moving into defensive formations, their hulls gleaming with Guardian's technological enhancements. Reality anchors were coming online throughout the fleet, creating stable zones where human physics would take precedence over devourer influence. The first engagement began at the edge of the system. Human fighters, their engines enhanced with Guardian's propulsion technology, engaged the scout ships in a dance of impossible beauty and violence. Streams of coherent energy lanced through space, but the devourer ships seemed to absorb or deflect most attacks. "They're learning," Guardian observed, its pattern shifting to analytical mode. "Each weapon you fire, they study and adapt. This is how they consumed my people's fleets." Sarah watched the tactical display with growing unease. Guardian was right. The devourer ships were becoming more effective with each passing minute, their movements adapting to human tactics in real time. But then something unexpected happened. Captain Martinez's squadron broke formation and began executing a maneuver that defied standard tactical doctrine. Instead of maintaining defensive positions, her ships scattered in seemingly random directions, firing at empty space while apparently ignoring the enemy vessels entirely. "What is Martinez doing?" Admiral Morrison's voice was tight with confusion. Sarah suddenly understood. "She's implementing Guardian's chaos theory. The randomness is intentional." Guardian's patterns brightened with what might have been hope. "Yes, the devourers adapt to patterns, but they cannot adapt to true randomness. Your Captain Martinez is doing what my people never learned to do. She is being beautifully unpredictable." The effect was immediate. The devourer ships, which had been adapting smoothly to human tactics, suddenly began moving erratically. Their forms flickered between dimensions as they struggled to process the chaotic input from the human fighters. Other squadron leaders began implementing their own variations of controlled chaos. Ships would suddenly reverse course for no apparent reason, weapons fired at seemingly random intervals, and formations dissolved and reformed in patterns that followed no mathematical logic. It was everything Guardian had taught them about human unpredictability, made manifest in space combat. "It's working," Sarah breathed, watching as one of the devourer ships began losing cohesion. Its reality-warping hull started to collapse inward, unable to maintain its impossible geometry while processing truly random inputs. But the victory was short-lived. The remaining devourer ships suddenly stopped trying to adapt to human tactics and instead began implementing their own chaotic behaviors. They were learning from humanity's lesson in real time. "No," Guardian said urgently, "this is dangerous. If they master chaos as a tactical doctrine, they will become truly unpredictable. My people's weapons were designed to fight ordered enemies. Chaotic devourers are beyond even our experience." Sarah felt a chill of realization. Humanity's greatest advantage was being turned against them. The very unpredictability that made humans effective against the devourers was now being copied and potentially improved upon by their enemies. "Admiral," Sarah activated her communicator. "Guardian says we need to stop the chaotic engagement immediately. The devourers are learning from our tactics." Morrison's response was immediate. "All ships implement Protocol Omega, fall back to defensive positions," but it was too late. The devourer ships had absorbed enough data to begin their own chaos protocols. They scattered throughout the system, their movements becoming truly random, their weapons firing in patterns that no tactical computer could predict. Guardian's form was now pulsing with urgent energy. "There is one option," it said through the translator. But it requires a level of trust that my people never achieved with any other species. What do you need? Sarah asked without hesitation. I need to interface directly with your fleet's tactical systems, not as an advisor or consultant, but as an integrated component of your command structure. I need you to trust me with control of human lives. Sarah understood the magnitude of what Guardian was asking. It wanted access to the fleet's weapons, navigation, and defensive systems, complete integration with human military capability. In the wrong hands, such access could mean the destruction of humanity itself. Guardian, she said carefully, are you asking me to make you part of our command structure? I am asking you to accept me not as a guest or ally, but as a true member of your species' military. I want to fight not alongside humanity, but as humanity. This is the bond my people never achieved with others, and it may be the key to victory. Through their mental link, Sarah felt the depth of Guardian's commitment. The being wasn't just offering to help. It was offering to become human in every way that mattered. To think like humans, fight like humans, and if necessary, die like humans. Sarah made the decision that would define the course of the war. Admiral Morrison, Guardian is requesting direct integration with our fleet command systems. It wants to become part of our tactical network. There was a long pause. Finally, Morrison's voice returned, heavy with the weight of command. Guardian, are you requesting naturalization as a citizen of the Terran Federation? Guardian's response was immediate and unwavering. Yes, Admiral. I request the right to fight and die as a human, in defense of humanity's future. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she realized what Guardian was giving up. It was abandoning its identity as the last representative of its species, choosing instead to become the first of a new kind of human. The being that had been created as an apex hunter was choosing to become humanity's protector. Granted, Morrison said formally. Welcome to the Terran Defense Fleet, Guardian. You are hereby granted the rank of Fleet Commander with full tactical authority. Sarah, initiate the integration protocols. Sarah's hands flew across the control panels, establishing the connections that would link Guardian's consciousness directly to the fleet's command systems. As the interface came online, she felt Guardian's presence expand, touching every ship, every weapon, every crew member in the human fleet. The effect was instantaneous. Human ships began moving with impossible coordination, not because they were following orders, but because Guardian was thinking with human minds spread across hundreds of vessels. The chaotic devourer tactic suddenly became predictable to a consciousness that could process information from multiple sources simultaneously. Now we fight as one, Guardian said, its voice echoing through every ship in the fleet. Let the devourers adapt to the chaos of unity. The battle that followed would be remembered as the moment humanity truly became a spacefaring civilization. Not because of their technology or tactics, but because they had learned to think as something greater than individual humans while still retaining their essential humanity. Guardian had found its true purpose, not as a weapon or tool, but as the bridge between what humanity was and what it could become. 3 years after the first battle, Sarah stood on the observation deck of the starship Harmony, watching the construction of New Guardian Station in the liberated Kepler system. The massive structure was a fusion of human engineering and Guardian's architectural knowledge, creating something that neither species could have built alone. Living metal flowed in organic curves, while quantum resonance chambers hummed with energies that bridged multiple dimensions. Guardian's physical form had evolved significantly since its integration with the human fleet. It now maintained a stable humanoid appearance most of the time, though its surface still shimmered with the bioluminescent patterns that had become its signature. More importantly, it had developed what could only be called a sense of humor, particularly enjoying wordplay and the kind of linguistic chaos that arose when human idioms were translated through alien mathematics. The irony is not lost on me, Guardian said, joining Sarah at the viewport. I was designed to be the perfect hunter, and yet I find my greatest satisfaction in building rather than destroying. Sarah smiled, noting how Guardian's speech patterns had become more naturally human over the years. Maybe perfect hunting was never about destruction. Maybe it was always about finding the right prey, ignorance, hopelessness, despair. The war against the Devourers had evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history. Instead of the devastating conflict that had destroyed Guardian civilization, It had become a strange kind of construction project. Humanity's chaotic creativity, enhanced by Guardian's technological knowledge and unified by their shared consciousness link, had proven to be exactly the combination needed to not just fight the Devourers, but to heal the damage they had caused. The breakthrough had come 18 months earlier, when Guardian had made a startling discovery. The Devourers weren't actually evil in any meaningful sense. They were antibodies from a dying universe, drawn to areas of high creative energy because such energy posed a threat to their reality's attempt to achieve perfect entropy. They consumed civilizations not out of malice, but because those civilizations represented the kind of chaotic growth that could tear holes between dimensions. Understanding this had changed everything. Instead of simply fighting the Devourers, humanity had begun working to heal the dimensional barriers that allowed them to enter normal space. It was delicate work, requiring the kind of precise chaos that only humans seemed capable of generating. Guardian's role had evolved from fleet commander to something more like a universal translator, helping human creativity interface with cosmic forces. Dr. Chen, Admiral Morrison's voice came through the ship's communication system. "Could you and Guardian join me in the briefing room? We've received a transmission that you both need to hear." Sarah and Guardian made their way through the ship's corridors, which had been designed with Guardian's needs in mind. The walls contained crystalline matrices that allowed Guardian to interface with the ship's systems without the bulky translation equipment that had been necessary in the early days of their partnership. In the briefing room, they found Morrison standing before a holographic display showing a star map of the galaxy. Green zones indicated areas where the dimensional barriers had been successfully stabilized. Red zones showed active Devourer presence. Yellow zones represented systems that had been liberated, but were still healing from dimensional damage. The transmission came from the Andromeda Galaxy. Morrison explained. "It's a message from a species called the Architects. Apparently they've been monitoring our progress with great interest." The hologram shifted to show the alien message. The beings that appeared on screen were unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. Geometric entities that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. Their forms constantly shifting between states that human eyes could barely process. When they spoke, their words came through as pure mathematics that Guardian translated in real time. "Greetings. Humans of the Milky Way, we are the Architects, and we have watched your unique solution to the Devourer crisis with fascination. Your species has achieved something we thought impossible. You have turned a force of entropy into a tool for creation." Guardian's patterns shifted to what Sarah recognized as intense interest. "The Architects are legendary among my people. They were said to have transcended physical existence to become pure builders of reality. If they are real and if they are contacting us," the message continued, "we extend an invitation to your species and your Guardian ally. The universe is vast, and there are many crises that require your particular combination of chaos and wisdom. Would you consider joining the Galactic Restoration Project?" Morrison looked at Sarah and Guardian with obvious questions in his eyes. "What exactly are they offering?" Guardian's translation of the mathematical components in the message was staggering. The Architects were offering humanity membership in a cosmic civilization that spanned multiple galaxies. They wanted human chaos theory, and Guardian's stabilizing knowledge to help heal damage caused by various universe-threatening crises. It was an opportunity to become part of something unimaginably vast. "There is more," Guardian said, its pattern shifting to something Sarah had never seen before. "They are offering to help me locate other survivors of my people. The Architects believe that some may have escaped to other galaxies before the final war." Sarah felt a surge of joy and sadness at Guardian's revelation. Joy that it might not be the last of its kind. Sadness that it might leave humanity to rejoin its own species. Guardian seemed to sense her thoughts. "Sarah, your species gave me something my people never had. The understanding that family is not just about genetics or species. It is about choice, about bonds forged through shared struggle and mutual respect. I am Guardian, yes, but I am also human in every way that matters." The response to the Architects was crafted jointly by human diplomats in Guardian's mathematical poetry. They accepted the invitation, but with conditions. Humanity would join the Galactic Restoration Project, but as equal partners, not subordinates. Guardian would serve as humanity's ambassador to the cosmic community, but would remain a citizen of the Terran Federation. Most importantly, they insisted that any restored civilizations be given the same choice that Guardian had made, the opportunity to find new family among the stars, to become something greater than what they had been, while still honoring what they were. Sarah watched the message being transmitted toward Andromeda, carrying humanity's first diplomatic communication with a truly cosmic civilization. The journey that had begun with a misunderstood creature awakening in a research station had led to humanity taking its place among the builders of reality itself. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked Guardian as they watched the stars. "Giving up your identity as the last of your people to become the first of something new?" Guardian's response came through their mental link rather than the translator, carrying emotional nuances that words couldn't express. "I was created to be an apex hunter, to pursue prey across the galaxy until I found something worth hunting. I succeeded beyond my creator's wildest dreams. I found the most elusive prey of all: hope, purpose, and belonging. The being that had once been humanity's greatest threat had become its greatest gift. Not just the technology or knowledge it had shared, but the example it had set. Guardian had shown humanity that it was possible to transform from predator to protector, from destroyer to creator, from enemy to family. As New Guardian Station took shape against the backdrop of distant stars, Sarah realized that the title Apex Hunter had been perfectly accurate. Guardian had indeed been designed to find and capture the most important prey in the universe. It had hunted across the galaxy until it found a species worthy of recognition as master. But in the end, Guardian hadn't found a master at all. It had found equals, partners, and family. The hunt was over, but the real adventure was just beginning. In the vast cosmic community they were about to join, humanity would need guides who understood both chaos and wisdom, destruction and creation, the loneliness of being unique and the joy of finding belonging. Guardian would be that guide, the bridge between what they had been and what they could become. The Apex Hunter had completed its ultimate hunt. It had found home,